So we've been speaking about here on chapter 8 in the Tanya. We've been speaking about or delving deeply into the klipot, which is the term that the Tanya uses to describe that which is peeled or that which is covered, just like a peel that covers the fruit. There's two, is the domain that is covered or encaged, which is maybe a better word. Some parts of that domain can be redeemed, and that's the neutral part, which we learned about in chapter 7. So, for example, eating. When we eat food, it's a neutral activity, but if we use the energy of the food, as we've said so many times, to serve God and to do good, then we've redeemed the energy of that food or the food itself, which may have been covered, again, with those peels, with those klipot or encaged. Some parts of that cage can't be redeemed, and those are the prohibited parts. And that's really what he's delving into now in chapter 8. That's why, by the way, the word we said for prohibition, for forbidden in Hebrew is asur, which is the same word as the word for imprisoned. That's why in Hebrew, a prisoner is called asir, or asur means bound or bonded, or again, imprisoned. That's because some parts of this world can't be redeemed. And why? As we said before, because that's what God decided. God created the world. He decided this is good, this is evil, this you do, this you don't do. And this will be your GPS. All these commandments that I give you are your GPS on how to ensure that this world is an orderly world and not a world of a jungle. So he created compartmentalized the world in many ways. And those parts that are evil and therefore cannot be redeemed. Even though we may think we have all the powers, we are holy, we can go and redeem the world of, thievery. Well, no, sorry. Do not steal is do not steal. We can think that we can go and redeem the world of committing adultery. No, committing adultery is committing adultery. Sorry, you can't do that. That's the world of evil. It can't be redeemed. You may say, well, I'm stealing, I'm being a Robin Hood. I'm stealing from the rich to give to the poor. Sorry, that's still evil. You're not elevating the money by doing so. You're not elevating God's world by doing so. So there are very clear definitions of what those shalosh klipot atmeot, which he calls the three impure klipot, that cannot be redeemed. And that's really what we've been delving into. And here he continues on page 206. Let's continue where you just said, Margot, therefore also the evil impulse. Let's go.
Should I read?
Please, yeah.
Okay.
Please.
Therefore also the evil impulse, Yetzer Hara, and the lust for forbidden things is a demon of the alien demons, which is the evil impulse of the nations of the world, whose souls are derived from the three profound klipot.
Right.
The impulse that may drive a person to do an evil act that belongs to the three profound klipot, an act that cannot be rectified, is an alien impulse, an impulse that belongs to a non-Jewish soul, which derives from those klipot. The animal soul of the Jew derives from klipot noga, so its negative impulses are also klipot noga impulses, impulses for deeds that, though negative, can be rectified. The essence of the Jew is rectification, tikkun, so everything Jewish is rectifiable. This is not to say that a Jew cannot sin with something forbidden. The fact is that he can, sometimes even more determinedly and enthusiastically than a non-Jew, but then he is behaving un-Jewishly, embracing tendencies that are unnatural to the Jewish soul.
Right. Stop there because I think this needs clarifications. The soul of the Jew versus the soul of the non-Jew. So everyone, we once used this example that I think that this world is like a symphony. And let's say the Jews are the trumpets, or you pick the instrument, the violins, the piano. And the piano has its specific role in the world symphony. And so does the trumpet has a specific role in the trumpets in a world symphony. So the nations of the world are like instruments in one big world symphony. Some instruments, like it is in every symphony, have more to play, have more roles to play, or maybe they don't have more roles to play. They have They have just more intense roles to play, not more in quantity, but maybe more in quality, just like it is in the World Symphony. Sometimes you get just a triangle, where you do, what is it called, that instrument? That thing once in a while. But every nation of the world is a different instrument. So you have the Jews, you have the Buddhists, and you have the Christians, and you have the Muslims, and you can continue on and on with the list. Now, the Jews have received 613 commandments, what the non-Jews did not receive. And that is because we have a unique role to play. That unique role pertains not just to us, but to the rectification of the world, as it says so here. That's why the prophet demands of the Jewish people to be a light unto the nation, right? Or lagoim, because that's part of our role to play in this world symphony. It's not taking away, God forbid, from the other roles of the people. It's not taking away from the importance of the other people. It's not taking away from the instruments of the other people. Quite the opposite. The instruments of the other people might be just as important as our instrument. We just have a different role. Now, part of that role is to rectify the world. And therefore, the Jews are in a way, are given the commandments in the Torah and are empowered with the ability to go out to the world, because that's part of our role. Now, because we have to engage ourselves in this world, there's an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage, obviously, is that we can make an impact. And we've seen Jews, it's unbelievable, but there are 0.02% of Jews in the world, yet 23% of the Nobel Prize list is Jewish. And that's just in that world. You can go on and name other worlds. Unfortunately, we've had a terrible impact on terrible worlds. You have the Bernie Madoffs of the world too, God forbid. But we're empowered with that in our soul, so to speak, like Rabbi Stans is saying here. So it has great advantages because we can make an impact maybe more than others could. On the other hand, it also, because we're enmeshed in this world, we're also maybe susceptible to the negativities of this world. And that can impact us much more than maybe other nations can be impacted. And it can impact us and pull us towards the Shalosh Klipot Etmot, the evil side, even more. That's why, Elie Wiesel again writes in his book that I know Jordan is reading right now, that all the rivers, Jordan, what is it called? His memoirs? All the rivers run to the sea.
All rivers run to the sea.
Right. And then the second volume is The Sea is Never Full. But if I recall correctly, I think somewhere there, he has a beautiful thought about why Jews in the Torah, at least in the early stages of the Torah, compared to one of two things, either the stars of the heavens or the dust of the earth, right? God says to Abraham that your descendants will be as numerous as the stars of the heavens or as numerous as the dust of the earth. Why these two parables? And he responds, that's because that's the nature of the Jew. He can really be as high as the stars of the heavens, shine as strongly as the stars of the heavens, or God forbid, you can be as low as the dust of the earth. There's almost almost bipolar in that case. There's no middle ground. So why? Because it all goes back to what Rabbi Stans is saying here, that in a way our task is to make this impact on the world. Doesn't mean that other people don't have that task too, but we were just empowered with that task, and therefore so many commandments. We received 630 commandments that deal with this world. Most of them, the vast majority of them, deals with this world, because we have to be impacting this world, not just ourselves. We can't just be Tibetan monks, meditating on mountains all day long. That's not the Jewish thing. Maybe it's the Buddhist thing, but it's not the Jewish thing. The Jewish thing is to impact the world. But again, by impacting the world, we're also becoming susceptible to the negative influences of this world. And therefore, we have to be very careful. And therefore, when I think of the great thoughts that Rabbi Stein said, it's such brief words, yet it ought to be a constant reminder specifically for the Jew, is that we have to remind ourselves all the time that we have to be in this world, but we're not of this world. And therefore, we can't allow ourselves to be drowned in this world and be influenced by its negativities. It's not an easy thing, because just think about this, right? If I had to be a Tibetan monk, if you had to be a Tibetan monk, that's quite easy. You go, you divorce yourself from this world, and you're not in this world, so you're not tempted. The flip side of it, if you had to be one of those, people are completely immersed in this world and the pleasures of this world, that's also pretty easy. You're just a materialistic guy. How did Madonna call it? I'm a material girl, right? Isn't that one of her songs? So that's also pretty easy. But to be in this world, they're not to be of this world, to be somewhere in it, but above it. That's not easy.
The Rabbi,
Yes.
you started talking about the difference between a Jewish soul and a non-Jewish soul.
Yeah.
Could you go back to that subject?
Sure. I'm saying the difference is towards the role that we have to play. So again, the Jewish soul has a role to play in this world and to play in the rectification, as he calls it here, in the tikkun olam, in the rectification of this world, much more so than other souls. Buddhists, for example, don't necessarily have an impact on this world. They actually divorce themselves from the soul. And doesn't mean, again, that their instrument is not needed. Just that the nations of the world, as we mentioned, have different roles. That's where it stands. That's where that's the difference. Now, again, I think that's why we're given more commandments in order to give us that GPS, because when you're immersed in this world, you got to be careful. There's a lot of temptations, a lot of noises, a lot of distractions, to say the least. So there's more commandments for the Jew because of the role of the Jewish soul. So that's really what this small paragraph is saying here. But I would go just to develop this idea a little bit more. And I would say that that's reminiscent of Noach. I don't know, that's the image that comes to mind. But Noach, to face the generation that was completely evil, he too was charged with changing the world and making everyone do teshuvah. God actually told Noach, I'm bringing a flood, and you better tell the Jewish people, you better tell the people of the world to repent. And if they repent, a flood won't come. And Noach was unsuccessful. At the end of the day, who does he save? His family. That's all. I mean, of course, thank God he saves the species, not all of them, just 2 by 2 and 7 by 7, right? But at the end of the day, he doesn't save any human being except for his family. So he's very unsuccessful. Now, what's Noach's end? It's tragic. Noach comes out of the ark and he doesn't know how to deal with the world that was decimated. So he plants grapes, plants a vineyard, and drinks wine and becomes drunk. And in a way becomes the first alcoholic that we know of in history. Drinks himself to oblivion. Why? Because if you don't know, and that's the extreme danger, if you don't know how to be impactful in this world and be an influencer, then eventually the world will influence you and it will get the better of you. And you'll find ways to escape from the bombardment of the world. Because you know that it's not you. The world is not you. Yet when the world overtakes you, you think that, oh, this is not me. So what am I? And sometimes the world is too strong that you don't know the answer to what am I. And then you look for answers elsewhere, in drugs and alcohol, like Noach, in other places, until hopefully you have an awakening. But that's the danger of dealing with this world. Noach had to deal with this world, but he wasn't an influencer. He shied away from his role to impact this world. And at the end of the day, if you don't become an influencer, you become an influencee. As Maimonides puts it very clearly, and Maimonides was someone who knew one thing or two about this subject. He said that at the end of the day, if we don't influence society, society will influence us. Going back to Elie Wiesel, I know that he told the rabbi, I won't mention his name, the rabbi wanted to be the rabbi of stars in Hollywood, and he rubbed shoulders with Michael Jackson and all these people. And Elie Wiesel says, well, you want to influence Hollywood. Before you can influence Hollywood, Hollywood will influence you. And that's the truth. If we don't assume that role of being influencers in this world, eventually the world can influence us. And that's when it becomes tricky, to say the least. So if we have to, again, analyze the Jewish role, the Jewish role is to be influencers, to impact this world. And we can't shy away from it. And I think that's also the best way to not allow the world to influence us. Because when you influence the world doesn't influence you. When you don't influence the world and you just, floating, and eventually the world will influence you because you're being passive. So, there's a great story about it's on video about the late Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson of blessed memory, who was approached by a great rabbi who asked the Lubavitch Rebbe a simple question. He said to him, look, you send people, your students, you send them all over the world. You have Chabad everywhere, right? You have Chabad in Kathmandu, Nepal. You have Chabad in Sydney, Australia. You have Chabad in, my sister is in Mar del Plata, Argentina, in these remote places. So he asked him, are you not afraid that they'll be influenced by these places? I mean, if you stay in, in the hub, in Jerusalem and in Brooklyn, New York, or wherever it is, then okay. But now you're sending them, you're not afraid that they're going to be influenced by the world? And the Rebbe knew exactly who he was speaking about. He was speaking to this rabbi. So he responded in rabbinic language, but it's a powerful answer. He said to him, I'm surprised. You're asking a question and the answer is a law in the code of Jewish law. You should know the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, you're a rabbi. So the rabbi says, what law in the code of Jewish law? He says to him, well, in the law of salting the meat, right? Kosher meat needs to be salted. Why? Because there's a very strict prohibition in the Torah of not consuming blood. So we salt the meat so that it extracts the blood out of the piece of meat, and then we're not consuming blood. It's a difficult process, and we learn about it in rabbinic school. But when in one of these laws about salting the meat, the question is asked: what if the meat is in the process of extracting the blood, and a foreign drop of blood falls on that piece of meat? Can that salt extract that blood too? Will it swallow and extract that blood, the foreign drop of blood? Or do we need to restart the whole process of salting the meat? And the answer, and it becomes a rule. And in Aramaic, it sounds like this, called the Aidi, the palit lo bali, which means as long as the salt is dealing with extracting, taking out the blood, working, it can't swallow any foreign things. So that foreign drop of blood that fell on it really can't be swallowed by the meat because the salt is being active. That's the law. So the rabbi now turns to the rabbi and says, well, that's the law in the laws of salting the meat. But don't you understand? As long as we're being active, as long as we're influencing, we too can swallow. We're like that salt. We too can swallow any foreign influences. So as long as you're active, my emissaries are active. They're giving, they're impacting, they're influences. So when you're an influencer, you can swallow anything. It's when you're passive. It's when you're not doing anything. It's when you're shying away from that role of rectifying the world. That's when the world can get to you. So that's the deeper way to look at what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying here. That in a way, by rectifying the world, we're also not allowing the world to influence us. Okay, I think I've been doing too much talking, so please, my voice is telling me. So please feel free to share your thoughts, your disagreements, comments, if you have any. Otherwise, we can continue. No? All right, fine. So let's continue. Oh, no, you're on mute. Good, good. Diana has a comment, but you're on mute. 1 second.
Now it's on mute. Oh,
Perfect. Perfect. Now we can hear.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I was just going to say that you're making all of us feel like we're in the right place, doing the right thing by studying with you. And that's exactly what you're talking about. This is part of what you're preaching for today.
No, thank you so much. Thank you. I think that's what you're doing, in a way, and this is again, I think one of the greatest tools and weapons we have in order to rectify the world is to remain connected. There's that great story about, I think it was also the late Lubavitch Rebbe who was once climbing on a tree as a young, if I've ever shared the story, as a young boy. He was playing with his friends in the park, and the game was to climb on the tree and who can reach the highest peak of the tree. Today, if you do that and parents watch that, then they'll be called abusers. But back in the day, 100 years ago, I think it was allowed to climb trees. Anyhow, so he was playing this game and he won the game. He climbed to the highest peak of the tree. And his mother then asked him when he came off the tree, how did you win? How did you manage to climb to the highest peak? All your other friends, they didn't even get close to you. And he said, look, it's very simple. I watched my friends as they were climbing before I climbed. And I saw that the second they looked down, they became afraid and they were too paralyzed to continue their climb. I decided that when I climb, I'll never look down. I'll always look up and I won't be afraid. And then I'll win the game. And that's what I did. And his mother said, you see, that's a lesson for life. If you always look up, if you're always connected, then fear won't be able to permeate you and you'll never lose the game of life. If we remain connected, if we always look up, then I think that's easier to rectify the world because we're connected. It's easier than to engage in the world like we're saying now. But if we don't have that connection, that becomes problematic, to say the least.
You have to have your eyes on the ground too, otherwise you'll trip.
You're right. Absolutely right. Yeah. You know, it's interesting because it's actually a discussion in the Talmud. It's a fascinating discussion. It may sound poetic, but I think it's very, very much apropos. And that is, how should a person pray? Should a person pray with his eyes towards heaven and his heart towards heaven? Or should he pray with his eyes towards the world, towards his needs, and his heart towards his needs towards the world? And the answer that the Talmud gives is that a person should pray with his heart towards heaven and his eyes towards the world. What does this mean? That your heart also always has to be connected. Your eyes, you're right. You have to look at the world. Be careful with the world.
When you say the Shema, you keep your eyes closed.
Yeah. Right. That's right. Not figuratively, right? This is a metaphoric, the heart. I don't know if you can take the heart and actually pull it up towards heaven, but yeah. Even when they close, you have to look below. You're right. Not just the Shema. You know, when a woman lights Shabbat candles, they close their eyes. When we bless our children, very often we close our eyes. It's interesting. It's another interesting discussion. We won't deviate, but just to make the point, it's an excellent point that William brought here, because we close our eyes during the most important prayers, and maybe even during the most important actions in Judaism, blessing our children, or lighting Shabbat candles, like we said. And the reason is so that we are not distracted by this world, so that we can really connect to the soul of our children, to the soul of Shabbat, to the soul of the Shema. And we close our eyes. It's almost like they say that blind people, right? Their other senses are amplified. They connect better, they listen better, they hear better. Why? Because again, they're not distracted by the world. Andrea Bocelli is just in Israel right now. Apparently, he gave a concert right last night, I think it was. And I think that's a great example of a person who's blind, yet so sensitive to music. Maybe that sensitivity comes, there's a beautiful voice, obviously, but comes from his blindness. In order to be sensitive to the music of the world, to the divinity in the world, we too have to close our eyes from time to time. And it connects very much to what we're saying, because the world is a force. It's a force, sometimes of good and sometimes of bad. But in order to not allow the force of bad of the world to affect us in any shape or form, we have to close our eyes towards it and have our hearts connect to the heavens. And in a way, ensure that we are in this world, but not of this world. We remind ourselves that we are heavenly. From time to time, therefore, we ought to close our eyes.
Sometimes you pray without being verbal. The Shemona Esrei, you pray in silence.
Right. You still have to say the words. You're right, but the silence altogether is also part of that. Yeah. You know, the Breslever Hasidim, have this custom of what's called hitbodedut, which means where they go out to the forest and they meditate. And all these examples again are so that we can silence the noises of this world and remind ourselves who we truly are, and that our hearts are connected to the heavens, and that we're not in this, we're not of this world. But that again doesn't, it can't, when we do that, let's remind ourselves not to be stuck in that mode either, right? Then we have to go right back to the world after hitbodedut, after we close our eyes, or after we pray, or whatever it may be. Our duty, again, duty of the Jewish soul is to go back and rectify the world. Unfortunately, some people stay there. They get stuck in that mode. And we have to remind ourselves all the time, no, sorry, you were born to make an impact here on this world in your own way, of course, in your own domain. But don't just think of yourself. That has to be reminded too. Yeah. All right. Any other comments? Thank you, William. Thank you for that. Anything else?
Then you have some Hasidim who say a nigum is more important than a prayer.
Yeah, nigun is certainly, yeah. But I mean, there is wisdom to that also, because really nigun, which means a musical tune of Hasidim that were composed very often in heavenly states, that really can, they say that a nigun washes the soul. That's the Hasidic expression. And in a way, that's a reminder also that you're not of you. I'll conclude with this, but one of the great Hasidic Jews was a guy named the Rabbi Hillel of Parich, and really a very special man in many ways, many stories about him, we won't get into it, but Rabbi Hillel of Parich would give the example, it's just a beautiful example of how, sometimes we hear a song and we fall in love with that song. And then the song ends, and then we continue on with our lives. And our whole lives, we're in search for that song. So we go into a supermarket, we hear, is this a song? No, maybe yes, maybe no, and we Shazam it. Today you have the Shazam app. And you're constantly looking for that song throughout your life. Well, he says that's the story of the soul. In heaven, the soul heard the heavenly songs all the time. It was immersed in them, was basking in their light. But then the soul is sent down to this materialistic world. And in this world, the soul knows that the songs that it's hearing is not the song that it heard in heaven. It's not the song that made its soul feel so good. But it's in a search for it. So it goes shopping, thinks that maybe there will find a song. And then it goes, and God forbid, sometimes some addictions. Maybe there will find that song. And it continues to search for this heavenly song everywhere until hopefully it does a mitzvah. And it studies Torah like we're doing now. And then we say, oh, the soul says, oh, yes, that's the song I was searching for. That's the reminder that I am indeed heavenly. And I think that's why it's so important, like we said before, to remain connected, because when you're connected above, as they say, you can't fall below.